Many ethically compromised figures that surrounded Donald Trump, Stephen Miller stands out as perhaps the most repugnant. Now, it's not just the appalling policies he's championed, many of which targeted vulnerable communities, but the sheer coldness, and unsettling nature of his public presence. His voice grates, his demeanor is off-putting, and his rhetoric has long mirrored the cruelty at the heart of the Trump era. So when he finally buckles under pressure and gets publicly embarrassed, as he just did in a recent on-air fiasco, it's hard not to feel a certain poetic justice. You know, we're about to dive into clips from that spectacular unraveling, but before we do, please do drop a like and subscribe if you're part of the growing wave that refuses to stay silent. Every click does help this truth reach the people who really want to hear it. Now, before we break down Miller's televised tantrum, which was so chaotic that the network had to pull him off screen temporarily, let's highlight someone who had no time for this nonsense. Representative Alexandria Cortez, who didn't hold back in tearing right into him.
Point is that they are scrapping and grasping at straws because they have nothing else. Laugh at them. Stephen Miller is a clown. I've never seen that guy in real life, but he looks like he's like 4'10", and he looks like he is angry about the fact that he's 4'10", and he looks like he is so mad that he is 4'10", that he's taking that anger out at any other population possible. Like, laugh at them. Laugh at them. Yes, they are dangerous. Yes, we're here to be strong for one another. We need to expose the lies. We need to never let off the gas when it comes to protecting one another, exposing the lies, documenting things. We're seeing this too, right? And so I think it's very important to be able to hold multiple things at once. And we've seen this work in other cultures. We've seen this work in other countries. Yes, the resistance to authoritarianism is very real. The risks of abuse of power are very real. But one of the most powerful cultural things that you can do to a political movement that is predicated on the puffery of insecure masculinity. That's what this is about. This isn't, people talk about toxic masculinity more than, it's like, let's put that to the side for just 1 second. This is about insecure masculinity. And one of the best ways that you can dismantle a movement of insecure men is by making fun of them. By having secure men who aren't afraid of successful people around them, who are good dads, who have strong values, also participating in that as well.
Stephen Miller deserves to be called out as one of the most malevolent figures in the entire Trump administration. It's not just that his presence is deeply unsettling or that he, pulls the strings behind some of the worst policies, but because every policy he's responsible for is actively making America more divided and harmful. These are some of the most widely despised actions taken by the administration. His relentless attacks on marginalized communities, targeting people solely based on their appearance or background, are nothing short of racist or cruel. The way his policies have torn families apart is absolutely sickening, and yet Miller hypocritically tries to sell these brutal measures as if they're protecting ordinary people. The blatant lie was rightfully exposed in no uncertain terms right here.
Do you have any idea how much of ICE's workforce and resources have had to be reprioritized? How much of the Joint Terrorism Task Force's resources have had to be reprioritized to fight these domestic terrorists? Do you have any idea how many resources are spent
Stephen, you keep
trying
calling
to
them
hunt down and
terrorists, but
track
isn't that hyperbolic to call them terrorists?
What is? If anything, I'm understating the severity of the situation. What issue was more central in 2024 than turning back the border invasion? And since the day we came in, ICE officers have been subjected to a nonstop campaign of physical violence and harassment. every single day. And outside the Portland field office in particular, every night, they come, they assemble, they fight, they try to impede movement, they physically attack. For what purpose? Because we had an election, Boris. We had one. What's the purpose? To use actual physical violence to change the result of the election, to say you cannot turn back the border invasion. Do you have any idea how many resources we have had to...
Stephen Miller's attempt to spin his arguments are laughably weak and utterly absurd. The ridiculous claim that so-called domestic terrorists are flooding cities like Portland, Chicago or LA just because people are peacefully protesting, the brutal removal of their neighbours is nothing but blatant propaganda. Now, Miller's narrative is completely fabricated. There's no truth to it. Even trying to stoke fear and panic falls flat because he's completely incapable of making a convincing case, and it only gets worse. Halfway through his disastrous interview, his microphone literally malfunctioned, forcing the network to cut him off. Now, that breakdown perfectly mirrors Miller's overall inability to defend the hateful and divisive agenda he's been pushing.
You've called the district judge's ruling blocking the deployment of National Guard in Oregon legal insurrection. Does the administration still plan to abide by that ruling?
Well, the administration filed an appeal this morning with the Ninth Circuit. I would note the administration won an identical case in the Ninth Circuit just a few months ago with respect to the federalizing of the California National Guard. Under Title 10 of the U.S. Code, the president has plenary authority.
Stephen? Stephen? Hey, Stephen, can you hear me?
It's hard to call it anything other than a bit of cosmic justice when technical difficulties strike, during a Stephen Miller appearance. I mean, it's almost too perfect, isn't it, guys? The mic itself seemed to refuse to cooperate, as if it couldn't bear to amplify the shrill, grating voice of someone like Miller any longer. It was as though even the equipment had enough. And of course, Miller wasn't done making a fool of himself. He launched into another ridiculous argument, one that's easy to debunk, especially considering the deeply flawed history of Donald Trump's own actions.
Objective is to make it impossible for ICE to carry out ICE enforcement. When in our history have we tolerated unlawful riotous assemblies night after night around FBI buildings or ATF buildings or DEA buildings? This is the textbook definition of domestic terrorism, using the actual and imminent threat of violence to keep federal officials from doing their jobs. And unless we send in troops and resources, then we will continue to bleed federal law enforcement resources in these street battles. It's absurd, it's unconstitutional, and must be put down.
You cited...
When have we ever accepted attacks on government buildings? Oh wait, January 6th, remember? The day over 1,000 violent thugs pardoned by Donald Trump himself brutally assaulted law enforcement and stormed the Capitol. Now let's be honest here, guys, it's about time the mainstream media started calling this out. Stephen Miller is running the show behind the scenes. Trump can't handle the responsibilities of the presidency, so he leaves the dirty work to the likes of Miller and Russ Vought. Why? Because, all Trump wants to do is rename everything. Just mumble through incoherent speeches and turn the White House into, an ugly, gaudy mess that only a sketchy gold dealer and the rest of his corrupt family can somehow appreciate while they rake in cash during his sham of an administration. Now, this is the sad reality, guys, and that's why we're here seeing Stephen Miller lose it live on TV, desperately trying to distract from the fact that Trump is utterly unfit to lead.
So that's not exactly a no, Stephen. Can you just unequivocally state that the immigration
policy... I said it's a dumb question. Okay.
Well, I appreciate that, but
it's a dumb question.
So no, this policy is not designed.
I thought when I said it was a dumb question, it meant no.
Well, I just want to be clear and precise. I appreciate you trying to qualify my questions, but nevertheless, I think it's a fair one that a lot of people have.
My full answer is no, that is a lie, and it's a dumb question. But you said something else speaking to the premise of one of your questions. You said, well, aren't we provoking... Illinois governor says we're provoking actions that are unlawful. Why would the mere presence, just think about this for a second, if I put federal law enforcement and National Guard into a nice sleepy southern town, is anyone going to riot? Is anyone going to try to shoot them in the face?
If,
Are they going
if someone
try to
goes
attack them in
into
the
a
street?
building
They would say,
full of people in the middle of the night, covering their faces without identification, without identifying themselves, there might be concern among the community, especially if American citizens are being, especially if American citizens are caught up in that, which some reportedly were.
We netted over 30 foreign terrorists who are members of Train
and American citizens
who,
also
by the
wound
way,
up apprehended in that.
They torture women and children. Those American citizens are now safe from Train de Aragua.
Stephen Miller has given us many disastrous interviews, but this one might be just among the worst performances I've ever witnessed from him. You know, he's nothing short of grotesque figure in both appearance and substance. His voice is unbearable, his presence repulsive, and yet somehow he's the one running the show in the White House. Come on, guys, it doesn't make sense. It's important that we acknowledge this. Miller is the unelected bureaucrat pulling strings whilst the people who actually work to protect those who keep the country running, often at great personal sacrifice, are vilified by the likes of people like him. Now, the irony is staggering. The so-called deep state conspiracies never mention that Stephen Miller himself is the embodiment of that very concept, is the unelected power player in Trump's regime, right alongside Russ Vought and the Heritage Foundation operative installed through Project 2025. That's the real deep state, nothing else. And speaking of the deep state, let's talk about Larry Ellison, and his shady deal to buy TikTok. Why is he doing it? Because he and Trump are two peas in a pod, using their wealth and influence not just to line their pockets, but to push agenda on behalf of the billionaire class. And as Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has openly admitted, it's about using TikTok as a tool for propaganda and warfare. Ellison has funneled hundreds of millions into Israel, and now he's using his resources to further that cause by manipulating social media. Now, this is a dangerous game, guys. They're playing not just to enrich themselves, but to promote their authoritarian project. It's all part of the bigger scheme to weaponize government, shape the media landscape and spread their agenda. And that's why independent media is more crucial than ever. And voices like Alexandria Cortez, who can break this through, you can break through the corrupt noise, are exactly what the Democratic Party needs right now. We saw that clearly when she spoke out on Chris Hayes' show right here.
There absolutely is an unprecedented abuse of power, destruction of norms, erosion of our government and our democracy in order to prop up an authoritarian style of governance. That is happening. However, they are weaker than they look. And it is important that we remember that, because what they rely on is the impression of power, the perception of inevitability, in us giving up in advance to say, oh, what's going to happen if I stand up, etc. Nothing's going to happen. They rely on that perception of inevitability and power so that people comply in advance and acquiesce in advance and give up in advance. And at the end of the day, Donald Trump is at record levels of unpopularity in his tenure.
This is the kind of bold, morally grounded leadership that the Democratic Party desperately needs right now. Anyone who claims that Alexandria Cortez isn't part of the future of the party either doesn't understand what being a Democrat means, or is simply out of touch. You might prefer a different face leading the charge, and that's fine, but AOC's message has always been consistent, clear, and unwavering. She fights relentlessly against billionaire greed, works to dismantle the rigged system, demands money be removed from politics, and rises to meet the moral challenge of our time. That's precisely the kind of leadership we need from all candidates in this election cycle. We need them to reject PAC money, refuse corporate bribes, and say no to the oil lobby, the crypto lobby, and the Israeli lobby, all of which push agendas that don't serve the American people. And as always, guys, please make sure to smash and subscribe that button. And do drop a like on this video. If you've made it all the way to the end, please do leave a blue heart in the comments to show, you're standing strong and you're refusing to be silenced. I'll see you on the next one.